Hello, little toads. Grammy here with chapter 6 of Soup on Ice. Let's have a look at that picture. Looks like these kids are deep in thought, trying to work something out. Should we find out what it is? Whee! Soup and I were both yelling as we slid after a running start down the twin strips of ice known as the Double Zoomer. Every day the ice seemed to be becoming slicker, faster, and more fun. An elderly gentleman stood watching us. As we climbed back up the hill for another slide, he shook a warning finger. Boys, you best take caution on that ice. Maybe you didn't yet hear what happened to Joe Sutter. We stood still. What happened? Soup asked him. Well, I just heard about it myself. Seems like Joe slipped on the ice and hurt himself. They say his leg will be in a cast for nigh close to 10 weeks. Is he in the hospital? I asked. Sure is, the man answered. A doggone shame considering the Christmas Eve shindig. He shook his head. It would near to ruin everything. He turned and walked away. Soup looked at me. Rob, old top, you and I better leg it over to Miss Boland's, and right sudden. How come? I asked Soup as we ran. Because, he panted, last year I suspected that the man who dressed up as Santa Claus was that big Joe Sutter guy. We spotted Miss Boland near her house, parking her tiny Hoover car. We yelled to her. Hearing us, our country nurse turned and threw us a half-hearted wave, a gesture that lacked her customary exuberance. Soup nudged me. She knows. As we approached, Miss Boland's face seemed to darken. Her entire body slumped into a position of defeat. We just heard about Mr. Sutter, said Soup. His leg's hurt and in a cast, I said. Miss Boland glumly nodded. Maybe, said Soup, Rob and I can help. How? She asked. Well, said Soup, I'd sort of guess you might be needing somebody else to take Mr. Sutter's place and be you-know-who. Miss Boland's eyebrows raised in surprise. How in the name did you two rascals find out about all this? She threw up her mittened hands. Never mind. We certain can't discuss it out here in this freezing weather. Come on inside. We'll have ourselves some practical palaver. Taking turns with the broom on Miss Boland's porch, the three of us attacked the snow off our boots, whisked ourselves tidy, then entered her little house. I'm going to stop there for a second. You know, when I was a little girl, I was raised in a pretty northern area of Canada, and the winters were crazy cold like these ones and lots of deep snow. And we'd go out to play in our snowsuits, and we would just get covered with snow. And before we could ever go in the house, my mom would make us stand on the porch. She'd take a broom to us, and she'd literally sweep us from head to foot to get all the snow off before we could go in the house. Anyway, that reminded me of this. Miss Boland excused herself and waddled into her kitchen, returning in a minute or so, toting 3 steaming mugs. Hot cider, she told us. It's warded off many a Vermont chill, so drink hearty. The hot cider tasted super. Miss Boland had added a dash of spice that my tongue estimated was either cinnamon or nutmeg. Thanking her, Soup and I both admitted how yummy it tasted. Okay, said Soup, helping himself to a few more sips of hot cider. We've got a problem, Miss Boland. Her face fell. Don't I know it? I just came from the hospital. Joe's in bed straight out with his leg pointed at the ceiling, slipped on the ice, he says. You know where he lives, way out on Mulligan's Road. I nodded. Everybody says that Mulligan's Road is one of the most icy places in town because it's so near the lake. So, Miss Boland gestured with her hands, there's no way we can postpone Christmas until February. Soup grinned. All we have to do, he said, is scare up somebody else to play Santa. Miss Boland paced the floor of her small parlor. I can't think of anybody. Bert Motley's got the flu, Sam Crosetti is going out of town, and Ollie Lester has turned me down 3 times today. Joe, Bert, Sam, and Ollie are the only big chubby guys that I can corner. The rest of the gents don't do because they're all leaner than string beans. Gosh, said Soup, now I'm starting to understand why you're so down in the dumps. Me too, I told her. Joe Sutter is such a jolly guy. He's such a jolly, good-natured fellow, Miss Boland halfway smiled. Even though he can't be Santa Claus this year, Joe said we could borrow his Santa suit, which he keeps in his barn. I don't guess we'll need his sleigh now that Joe won't be available to drive it. Her face saddened. Trouble is, we don't have a guide to... Miss Boland snapped her fingers. I got it. I'll telephone my second cousin, who lives north of here up in Thurgood. His name's Harley Thatcher, and I know he'll make a cracking good Santa. He hasn't missed a meal in 30 years. Leaping to the phone, Miss Boland began to click the hook with an impatient finger. Myrtle, it's me. I'd like to call long distance. Miss Boland paused. Yes, I know it'll cost extra, but I'll spring. Connect me with number 34 in Thurgood. Soup and I waited. Helen, is that you? Please put Harley on the wire, will ya? Pause. He's out to the barn? Then run fetch him, and quick. Longer pause. Darn it, this'll gouge me a fortune. Harley, is that you? Pause. How would you like to ramble down here to learning on Christmas Eve and dress up as Santa Claus? Short pause. You wouldn't? Pause. You're singing in the church choir? Okay, so long, and love to Helen. Scratch one more off the list, said Soup. There's got to be somebody, I said. But who? Asked Miss Boland. Well, I said, what about Mr. Joubert? Mrs. Boland winced. Not hardly. Santa Claus is supposed to be jolly, and Mr. Joubert hasn't smiled since Emma left him. But then she came back. Soup said you could always ask Vernal Wilcox. Not a chance, Miss Boland told us. The trouble with Vernal is that he'll insist on playing Silent Night on the saxophone. He'll be really sore if we don't ask him to play, and if he blows that sorry contraption, everybody else will be sore, unless we pass out earmuffs. But, said Soup, we've got to get somebody to be Santa. What about Arnold Kesky? I asked. Miss Boland looked surprised. He's thinner than a rail on a hot weather diet. Yep, I said, but Arnold doesn't play the saxophone. I think he plays the cornet. Phil Tabor plays the trombone, said Soup. Miss Boland near to scream. Boys, we're not putting a band together. All we're doing is trying to finger somebody to play Santa, not a musical instrument. Maybe, said Soup, I could sort of convince my pa into playing Santa Claus. Miss Boland snorted. Your pa happens to be leaner than Arnold Kesky, in case you haven't noticed of recent. Soup jumped to his feet and paced the floor while Miss Boland sat a spell and gulped her hot cider, which was by this time cold. I've just thought of somebody, I said. Who? Miss Boland asked me. Harold Spencer. He's big and chubby, and he doesn't play the cornet or the saxophone. Miss Boland frowned. No dice. Harold's in charge of stringing the lights on the big spruce tree. He's got enough to tackle already. Okay, I said. We don't ask Harold Spencer. Soup still paced the floor. We're not thinking hard enough, he said. For sure and certain, there's just got to be somebody in the town of Learning who could be Santa Claus. But who? Asked Miss Boland. I already drove out to chase down Stilson Wheeler, but he's moved clear out of town. Besides, he might have made a poor Santa now that I really consider it. Why? Asked Soup. Because he chews tobacco. Little kids, said Miss Boland, won't believe in a Santa Claus who's got tobacco juice running down into his whiskers. Besides, right in the middle of his ho-ho-ho, he'd probably have to spit. Right then, I was witness to something quite unusual. Soup suddenly leaped high into the air, executed an incredible backflip, and landed cleanly. I got it, he yelped. Who? Miss Boland and I asked. I've got the perfect person to play the part of Santa Claus on Christmas Eve. Well, said Miss Boland, tell us. Soup grinned. Mr. Slosh Dubinsky. Miss Boland screamed, choking on her cider, and her face turned whiter than a midnight ghost. No, she whispered when she could finally speak. Slosh Dubinsky is probably the meanest guy in town, not to mention his cussing, and he positively hates kids. As she said it, I didn't quite agree with Miss Boland because I was remembering how Slosh was trying to protect the Tidwells. My mother usually insisted that there was good inside everybody. Mama couldn't be wrong. And I was thinking Mr. Slosh Dubinsky couldn't be all bad, the way some folks claimed. But, said Soup, he's perfect for the part. Why? Asked Miss Boland. Soup bent a wider grin. Mr. Slosh Dubinsky is perfect because it so happens that he's the only one we've got. Miss Boland groaned. Luther, she said at last to Soup, you're probably correct. Slosh Dubinsky would make an impossible Santa, but right now, he is our last chance. Soup nodded. However, said Miss Boland, you won't saddle me with going into that filthy pool parlor of his. I refuse to be the goat who has to ask a favor of that dreadful man. Ladies can't go into places like that. Well, who'll do it? I asked. Well, said Miss Boland, the fewer people who know about this caper, the better. Her eyes narrowed, staring at Soup and me. Then came the real shocker. She told us who would have to go face Big Slosh and convince him to be our Santa Claus. You two, she said firmly. Soup and I both spilled our cider. Should be pretty interesting to see Mr. Slosh Dubinsky and what he has to say in our next chapter. Till next time.